Hey guys, tonight we begin with a glimmer of sunrise over a kingdom where gold quite literally lies in the soil, where caravans line the horizon like sleepy ants, and where the rivers shimmer just a little too suspiciously, as if they're hiding something. You're waking up in the 13th century Mali Empire, not with an alarm clock, but with the gentle braying of camels and the distant hum of griots tuning their chorus. Welcome to West Africa, where your biggest worry today is whether the palace cooks remembered to grind the baobab seeds fine enough for your porridge. The dust rises gently from the earth as the sun spills across the savannah. You sit up, stretch, and blink toward a world that feels more like a dream than history. Off in the distance, an elder is calmly telling a story to a group of children who look only half interested, probably because they've heard it 12 times already. But don't worry. Tonight, you'll hear the version with the good parts left in. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. I love seeing sleepy history fans around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through the red earth barefoot, dodging a goat who looks like it has a personal vendetta against your ankles. All around you, the empire stirs. Mali isn't just a place, it's a rhythm. The birds know it. The traders know it. And you're about to know it too. Mali, in this golden moment, is rich in more ways than one. Sure, the gold is literally everywhere, so common that nobles dust it out of their ears, but the real treasure lies in its people, its culture, and its strangely peaceful brand of empire building. No one's swinging swords for sport here. The empire is expanding because, quite frankly, it's polite. This morning, you're not just anybody. You're walking in the shadow of greatness, or perhaps brushing elbows with it. Mansa Musa, yes, the Mansa Musa, hasn't taken the throne yet. But his world is being shaped all around you. You can practically feel it in the way merchants haggle more respectfully than necessary, and the way teachers at Quranic schools pause mid-lesson to comment on the quality of the afternoon breeze. Mali is flourishing under the reign of Mansa Abubakari II, Musa's predecessor and likely relative. Historians still argue whether they were cousins, brothers, or just part of the royal club. This is a time when kings are expected to rule with grace and keep their royal sandals dust-free, even when trudging through the marketplace. You pass by stalls where salt slabs trade hands like gold bars, and gold dust, ironically, is used to tip musicians. In this economy, wealth isn't just a number, it's texture, scent, and glitter. But the air is also thick with respect. Elders are bowed to, griots are offered extra dates, and even the town's donkeys are, in some strange sense, dignified. Now imagine, in this golden calm, a young boy quietly absorbing everything. He's not shouting or causing a ruckus. He's just watching, perhaps crouched near a water pot, drawing patterns in the sand while overhearing adults talk about trade routes, Islamic scholarship, and the best time of day to negotiate with camel herders. That boy is Musa. Not Mansa yet, not legendary yet, just Musa. No one suspects that he'll become the wealthiest human to ever live, adjusted for inflation, of course. Right now, he's more focused on how to avoid tripping over his robe during prayer, or how to properly hold a gourd of water when a diplomat visits. He's probably already rehearsing how to bow just enough to show respect without looking like his back hurts. Musa is growing up in a world where courtesy isn't just a nicety, it's political strategy. The Mali court is a well-oiled theater of gestures, glances, and phrases rehearsed over generations. Every "peace be upon you" carries the weight of an alliance. Every invitation to share dried mangoes is potentially the beginning of a 12-year trade agreement. It's exhausting, but Musa watches and learns, like a very quiet sponge in embroidered linen. Meanwhile, you pass under the shade of a shea tree where an old man is muttering about crocodiles in the Niger River. It's a real concern, those things are fast, and yes, they've been spotted around Jen. But in typical Malian fashion, the locals respond by naming them, feeding them occasionally, and warning visitors with an affection that borders on admiration. You sidestep a suspicious puddle and keep walking. The empire itself is built along the mighty Niger, a snaking lifeline that nourishes everything from rice paddies to trade boats. You see fishermen dragging in their morning catch, occasionally pausing to wave at passing scholars. Yes, scholars. Because education in Mali is not a side dish, it's the main course. Even now, the roots of Timbuktu's scholarly prestige are starting to spread, like vines quietly wrapping around history. Historians still argue whether Musa's childhood involved rigorous religious schooling or more traditional oral education. But one thing is clear, he came out of it knowing how to read the room, speak with honeyed calm, and never waste a good proverb. Back at the palace, the servants move like poetry, balancing trays of millet cakes and gently humming under their breath. You catch sight of Musa again, now slightly older, offering a guest a drink with both hands. It's a small gesture, but it echoes centuries of tradition. Gold glints on the horizon as the sun begins to dip. The air smells of wood smoke and sweet things, possibly dates, possibly fermented sorghum. You stretch your legs, thankful the walk is almost over. Somewhere behind you, a griot is already preparing to recite the deeds of kings and the unreasonably long names of their horses. And in the middle of it all, young Musa breathes in the golden dust and prepares, quietly, politely, and with impeccable manners, to make history. The palace you now find yourself strolling through doesn't glitter, it hums. Not with noise, but with the quiet confidence of an empire that knows exactly how valuable it is, even if it doesn't always feel the need to say so. That confidence seeps into the marble floors of the throne room, the patterns etched into the walls, and the infuriatingly smug peacocks wandering the gardens like they own the place. Musa is growing into his long limbs and longer silences. He watches his elders with an expression that says, "I'm learning," even when all he's really doing is trying to sneak a fourth honey date. You settle in beside a carved window arch, listening to the clink of cups and murmurs of debate. The palace, after all, isn't just a home, it's a hub, a blend of school, court, and low-key diplomatic battlefield. There's a visitor today, someone from beyond the empire's borders, maybe Morocco or further north still. He brings stories of cities so cold you can see your breath, imagine that, and spices so sharp they make grown men weep. Musa listens, brow faintly raised, as if wondering how much of this is real and how much is just well-seasoned storytelling. It's a useful skill, distinguishing between hyperbole and history. Especially when you're being groomed for power without ever being told so directly. Because here's the strange part, Musa wasn't born to rule. Not exactly. He wasn't the crown prince polishing his coronation speech in a back room. He was part of the royal line, yes, but his path to the throne would only appear when someone else, his predecessor, Mansa Abubakari II, decided to do something profoundly unexpected. Historians still argue whether Abubakari's ambition was scientific curiosity or an early form of escapism, but either way, the man ordered a massive fleet to sail westward into the Atlantic. Yes, west. As in, away from the empire, into the salty unknown. According to the official version relayed by Musa himself years later, Abubakari was obsessed with discovering what lay beyond the horizon, and built 1,000 ships to find out. You glance toward the river and imagine it. A line of boats packed with sailors, supplies, and probably far too many chickens. It sounds fantastical, borderline bedtime story material, but let's be honest, this was a man whose empire could afford to casually ship 1,000 people off to sea without bankrupting itself. The Mali Empire was just built different. And this, awkwardly, is how Musa becomes Mansa. When Abubakari doesn't return, surprise, Musa is chosen to rule in his place. Whether it was because of his character, his connections, or his tendency to not say wildly inconvenient things at council meetings, Musa becomes emperor. Just like that. With barely a gold-dusted fuss. You can almost see the ceremony play out before you. There are drums, of course. Maybe a speech about legacy, duty, and remembering to be kind to your scribes. Someone hands Musa a staff. He nods. It's all very dignified and surprisingly low drama, especially compared to some of the royal successions we've seen elsewhere in history, which often involve swords, uncles mysteriously falling down wells, and more shouting. Musa doesn't shout. He never has to. His power comes not from volume but presence. The kind of person who can walk into a room and cause everyone to subtly stand straighter, even if he's just asking where the mangoes went. And just like that, the empire shifts under his feet. Now you walk with him through those same corridors, only now he wears robes that shimmer like the desert at noon. Servants bow a little deeper. Advisors speak a little slower, just in case their Mansa wants to interrupt with a wise observation. He rarely does. Instead, Musa rules with a quiet meticulousness that makes everyone around him pay attention, or at least pretend to. By now, the empire stretches across modern-day Mali, Senegal, Gambia, Guinea, Niger, Nigeria, and Burkina Faso. That's not a small corner of the map. That's a cultural superhighway, with caravans flowing like blood through veins, carrying salt, gold, ideas, and the occasional cranky poet who refuses to travel by camel. The economy is thriving. The mosques are filling. And somewhere in the palace, Musa is sitting with a quill and parchment, quietly figuring out how to make things even better. One of his first acts as Mansa is to lean harder into Islam, not in a preachy way, but in a scholarly, reform-minded, empire-polishing kind of way. He builds mosques, supports Quranic education, and encourages judges and scribes to step up their game. He knows that an empire with structure is an empire that lasts, and also one that looks good on the international scene. Optics matter, even in the 14th century. But don't be fooled, Musa's not a zealot. He's a tactician. Religion for him is a tool, a unifier, a shared language that stretches from Mali to Cairo to Mecca. He's laying the groundwork for his most legendary flex, a pilgrimage so extravagant it'll make foreign kings stare at their budgets and quietly sob into their ledgers. For now, though, he prepares in silence. He listens. He builds. He asks after people's families in a way that's genuinely disarming. And above all, he makes the empire feel calm, even in its ambition. You pause in the doorway to the council room, where voices are low and the maps are large. The air smells of parchment, lemon water, and just the faintest hint of incense. Musa's there at the head of the table, fingertip trailing along a route that arcs from Mali across the Sahara, past Cairo, and all the way to Mecca. He's not just planning a journey. He's planning an entrance. But that's a story for later. For now, you lean back, let the golden dust of the empire settle into your clothes, and marvel at how quietly greatness can begin. The camels arrive first, plodding in slow, deliberate rhythm through the gates of the capital, each one piled with goods that shimmer faintly in the afternoon sun. Gold dust clings to the folds of the silk sacks they carry, and you can't help but notice how even the camels seem a bit self-satisfied. As if they know this trip is going to be remembered. You're standing on the edge of something huge. Not a battle. Not a coup. But a journey so elaborate, so jaw-droppingly lavish, that it will turn the heads of every scribe, merchant, imam, and nosy bystander between Mali and Mecca. Mansa Musa has decided it's time for pilgrimage. And he doesn't do things halfway. Now, sure, lots of people make the Hajj. It's a pillar of Islam, after all. A spiritual journey. A commitment to faith and humility. But when you're one of the wealthiest people in recorded history, your idea of humble tends to look a bit different. You walk through the staging area where preparations hum like a well-fed beehive. Food provisions are stacked in crates, scribes are practicing their polite Arabic phrases, and somewhere in the distance, someone's definitely trying to train a camel not to bite the musicians. Because yes, there will be music. Mansa Musa isn't just traveling for devotion. He's curating a show of cultural power that will ripple across the medieval Islamic world. According to most accounts, his caravan includes tens of thousands of people. Some say 60,000. Others, historians, bless them, debate whether that number was inflated by chroniclers with a flair for drama. But even the most conservative estimates agree, this wasn't a couple of tents and a prayer rug. It was a royal procession with cooks, griots, soldiers, slaves, scholars, and likely a few slightly confused tagalongs who just didn't want to miss out on the snacks. You pick up the scent of roasted lamb and tamarind. Someone's already cooking for the road. There's an unspoken understanding that the empire won't pause while its ruler is away. It will simply stretch, like a cat, and adjust its weight. Musa, ever the planner, ensures that governors are appointed to maintain order in his absence. His cousin holds down the fort, probably with a mixture of pride and stress-induced insomnia. And Musa, he's focused entirely on the road ahead. Picture it, shimmering heat rising from the dunes as the caravan snakes across the Sahara. Sand crunches beneath your sandals, and every now and then, a camel lets out a deeply unimpressed grunt. You sip date juice, shade your eyes, and wonder how Musa is managing to make even the desert feel organized. He travels in style. Gold-laced garments, jewel-encrusted accessories, parasols held aloft by servants to shield him from the sun. But it's not just luxury, it's diplomacy. Every gesture is deliberate. Every gift, every public prayer, every measured word spoken to a local chief along the route, it's all part of a broader playbook that turns reverence into influence. By the time you reach Cairo, you're dusty, sunburned, and convinced that sand is somehow multiplying inside your clothes. The city, in contrast, is bustling and brilliant. Crowded markets, elaborate mosques, and an unshakable sense that this is the beating heart of North African commerce and scholarship. Cairo is where Musa makes his biggest splash. He meets the Sultan's deputy with grace, offering lavish gifts, chatting politely about theology and politics, and, almost accidentally, wrecking the local economy. You're standing in the bazaar when it happens. Musa begins distributing gold to the poor, to merchants, to artists, to anyone who offers a service with a smile. It's generous. It's benevolent. It's financially catastrophic. See, when someone hands out that much gold, it doesn't just disappear. It floods the market. Prices wobble, then crash. Inflation spikes. And for over a decade, Cairo's economy reels. Musa apologizes, sort of. Some sources say he tries to fix it by borrowing gold back at high interest. Others claim he simply smiles and moves on, utterly unbothered. Historians still argue whether this economic earthquake was intentional, a blunder, or just the unintended consequence of divine-level generosity. Either way, it's the sort of move that ensures people will talk about you for centuries. Especially if those people are writing in beautifully calligraphed Arabic on parchment that somehow always smells faintly of cinnamon. From Cairo, the journey continues eastward, finally arriving at Mecca. The holy city is solemn and serene, filled with pilgrims from across the Muslim world. And here, for all his riches, Musa is just another believer, bowing in prayer, circling the Kaaba, walking barefoot with the same quiet awe as everyone else. It's a humbling moment, and not just for you. The contrast between the glittering display of power and the simplicity of faith is palpable. You sit beside a weathered merchant from Persia and a goat herder from Anatolia, and nobody cares who's rich or not. In that moment, everyone is simply human, seeking peace, purpose, and maybe a little shade. But Musa's not finished. The return trip is where his mind really starts worrying. He's been taking notes, mental and literal. He's seen the libraries of Cairo, the scholars of Mecca, the bustling intellectual debates that happen casually over cups of mint tea. And he wants that for Mali. Not just the trappings of wealth, but the deep infrastructure of knowledge. The kind that makes an empire last, not just shine. So he begins recruiting. Architects, jurists, poets, people with skills Mali can absorb, rework, and make its own. Among them is an architect named Al-Sahili, who will later help reshape Timbuktu into a beacon of learning and luminous architecture. By the time the caravan turns back toward the empire, you've seen half the known world, met princes and beggars, and developed an opinion on camel saddles. Spoiler: still uncomfortable. But you also feel something else. The empire Musa left behind is not the empire he'll return to. Because now, Mali isn't just wealthy. It's legendary. You return to Mali feeling dustier, wiser, and vaguely nostalgic for dates and camel bells. The homecoming is quieter than expected, not because people aren't excited, but because they're stunned. Word of Mansa Musa's pilgrimage spread faster than a griot's gossip, and the empire is now famous far beyond its red-soiled borders. And fame. Fame comes with expectations. You step down from the caravan into a city buzzing with anticipation. Markets are more crowded, apprentices more eager, and bureaucrats more, well, bureaucratic. Everyone's waiting to see what Mansa Musa will do next. Will he build a golden mosque? Invent camel-based banking? Personally knight a falcon? Instead, he calls for books. The great city of Timbuktu, yes, that Timbuktu, the one school kids later joke about being impossibly far away, is about to become the Oxford of the Sahara. Mansa Musa wants learning, and he wants it big. So, he begins pouring resources into universities, madrasas, and libraries. You see carts rolling in with manuscripts on law, astronomy, philosophy, even poetry about goats. No subject is too obscure. Musa doesn't just import knowledge, he cultivates it. He invites scholars to teach and debate. He builds new spaces for study, including the legendary Sankore University, which eventually holds thousands of handwritten volumes. Some of the texts are so rare and so fragile that modern historians handle them with gloves and the kind of reverence usually reserved for heirloom pastries. You pause in the shade of a mud brick building, its edges softened by time and sand. A young student is reading aloud to a group of eager listeners, and even though your Bambara is a little rusty, you recognize words about justice, the stars, and perhaps, just maybe, a side note about goat hygiene. At court, Musa seems more focused than ever. He's still polite, painfully polite, at times, but his vision has sharpened. This isn't just about looking powerful. It's about being powerful in a lasting, quietly influential way. Think less Game of Thrones, more academic grant funding with a royal seal. He invests in Islamic jurisprudence, appoints learned judges, and standardizes laws across his vast domain. Of course, historians still argue whether these reforms were enforced evenly, or if they mostly stayed in the capital while local chiefs nodded and kept doing their own thing. Either way, the gesture is strong, and it reshapes how governance is understood across the region. You stroll through the palace courtyard one evening, watching the soft lantern light flicker on the gold-trimmed robes of officials. A griot begins humming a tale of Musa's pilgrimage, already mythologizing it. You notice they've made him taller, and possibly glowing. The stories grow more exaggerated by the week. One version has him converting all of North Africa by smiling at it. Another insists he built a mosque every Friday, no matter where he was, even if he had to borrow someone's goat pen. You wonder if he minds. Honestly, probably not. Because while the stories inflate, so does Mali's standing. Trade expands. Gold flows like honey. Salt caravans from Tagaza arrive with more regularity, and Mansa Musa uses this newfound visibility to tighten control over the empire's resources. His tax system becomes more efficient. Not fun, but efficient. Behind the scenes, he's still recruiting talent. Remember al-Sahili from Cairo? Musa commissions him to build grand mosques and palaces using Sahelian architecture, blending North African motifs with local flair. The results are mud brick marvels with wooden beam projections that double as scaffolding and, according to legend, excellent perches for chatty birds with political opinions. You visit the Jingareber Mosque, built under Musa's reign, and it feels like stepping into a sacred oven, warm, echoing, and deeply peaceful. Worshippers file in with calm reverence. The imam's voice bounces gently off the walls, while outside, a market sells papyrus, preserved lemons, and sandals with just enough decorative flair. But even in prosperity, there's complexity. Musa rules a vast empire stitched together by dozens of languages, cultures, and customs. Keeping everyone happy is impossible. Some regions chafe under taxation. Others grumble that Islam is being nudged into places it wasn't before. Musa is careful not to force conversions, but there's pressure, subtle, polite, well-dressed pressure. And the gold, while plentiful, has a dark undercurrent. Much of it is mined in brutal conditions. Laborers, many of them enslaved, dig it up by hand, in heat that makes your eyebrows sweat. Musa rarely speaks about the human cost. Neither do the poets. You try to reconcile the Scholar King image with the economic engine that fuels it. It's complicated. Which is why, over bowls of millet and honeyed dates, you often find scholars and advisors debating what makes a good ruler. Is it justice? Expansion? How few people fall asleep during your speeches? You drift from court to library, from library to mosque, wrapped in the rhythms of an empire balancing power and piety. Musa walks these streets often, usually in quiet dignity, greeting elders, blessing children, and occasionally stepping into disputes to smooth over arguments with that maddeningly calm voice. He never seems rushed. Not even when fire ants find their way into the palace pantry. Long story, short ending, the ants won. What's remarkable isn't just the wealth or the buildings, it's the tone he sets. Mali under Mansa Musa becomes a place where learning is respected, generosity is expected, and even the most powerful man in the empire always says thank you. Whether you're a trader from Morocco, a wandering scholar from Andalusia, or just a really tired camel wrangler, you feel it. That slow-breathing rhythm of a civilization that isn't just surviving, it's thinking. You wake one morning to the sound of merchants haggling over ostrich eggs and scrolls, and you realize something subtle has shifted. Mali is no longer simply the empire of Mansa Musa, it's a destination, a symbol, a brand. And just like any brand that's suddenly trending, it comes with requests, visitors, and a lot of questions. Foreign dignitaries are arriving in droves. From Cairo, from Fez, from the edges of Anatolia, and even the courts of Christian Europe. Some come bearing gifts, some come out of curiosity, and some, let's be honest, come sniffing around for gold with the enthusiasm of a retriever that spotted a sandwich. You find yourself standing at Musa's side during one such audience with a North African delegation. The men bow, then unfold requests with the smooth precision of people used to being listened to. Musa, in turn, responds with a generosity that's both dazzling and mildly alarming. He offers them fine horses, bolts of imported silk, and just enough nuggets of gold to make the entire city briefly shimmer. But here's the thing, he's not being reckless. There's strategy in this generosity. Musa understands the power of image, of respect, and of reciprocal diplomacy. In an age before mass media, alliances are built on storytelling, face-to-face honor, and gifts you can hold in your palm. So when he hands over a goblet carved from ivory or a set of elaborately dyed robes, he's also handing over trust. Now, there's an ongoing scholarly debate over whether Musa's diplomatic spending genuinely strengthened Mali's foreign alliances, or whether it merely made people expect more golden trinkets next time they visited. Either way, the legend keeps growing. And let's not forget the letters. Musa begins corresponding with other rulers, some letters written in his hand, others by his scribes. They're polite, flowery, occasionally a little passive-aggressive in the way that only 14th-century diplomacy allows. You read one draft where he refers to a rival's proposal as curious and not without a kind of bold grace. That's medieval for, nice try, buddy. He's walking a tightrope now, balancing humility with authority. The Quran guides many of his decisions, but so do local customs. Sometimes these conflict. Should he allow a sacred grove ceremony in a village that resists Islam? Should he fund repairs on both mosques and traditional shrines? Should his formal robe be embroidered in gold or, as one nervous advisor suggests, something a bit more modest, Your Majesty? You see him wrestle with these questions, not dramatically, not with public flair, but late at night, under quiet lantern light, while the city exhales around him. One evening, he hosts a feast. Not the kind with 200 guests and fire jugglers. A smaller one. Just local elders, religious leaders, a handful of griots, and you, if you don't mind sitting on a slightly uncomfortable woven mat. There's roasted guinea fowl, piles of steaming rice, salted fish that tastes better than it smells, and honey-sweetened tamarind drinks. A griot begins to sing a verse about Musa's journey across the Sahara. The part about Cairo has grown increasingly wild. You smile when you hear they've now accidentally flooded an entire market with gold and dates. Historical accuracy. Debatable. Vibe. Impeccable. You turn to find Musa watching the performers with a look that's both amused and thoughtful. He knows his story is being spun into legend, embroidered like a tapestry that will one day hang in someone's very confused living room. But he doesn't stop it. He just asks the griot afterward, "Next time, add the part about the architecture, would you?" It's not just the cities and mosques, you realize. He's building narrative infrastructure, myth, memory, identity. People will forget the exact routes of his caravans, but they'll remember the king who made libraries flourish in the desert. They'll remember how polite he was, and how politely he changed the world around him. There's a lesser-known anecdote whispered among the scribes. Once, a rival trader accused Mali of inflating the gold market. Musa invited the man to dinner. By the end of the meal, they were exchanging poetry, and the man had accidentally gifted Musa a prized salt tablet. Whether this is true or not, it gets repeated often, because it fits the legend. Still, not everything is smooth. Tensions bubble along the empire's outer regions. Trade routes can be fickle, especially when bandits decide they too enjoy golden goblets. Musa commissions new outposts and patrols, strengthening the spine of the Trans-Saharan network. Meanwhile, he begins training scribes in record-keeping, taxation, and, of course, how to draft a very polite cease and desist letter. You visit one of these dusty administrative hubs, where a harried clerk is trying to calculate camel tolls using a system that involves shells, pebbles, and mild exasperation. It's the Sultan's new system, he explains. It's fair. Just slow. From the borderlands to the court, you start to see the empire's bureaucracy harden into something lasting. Musa's empire isn't just rich, it's organized. Mostly. Depending on how well-fed the clerks are that day. Still, the sheer scale of the place makes your head spin. From the Atlantic coast to the edges of the Songhai lands, Mali pulses with movement. Traders carrying kola nuts, scholars riding donkeys with more dignity than most nobles, and families migrating in search of water and peace. You wonder if Musa ever sleeps. Probably not much. Because even as his legend grows, he seems quietly aware that legends don't run empires. People do. And people need roads, and rules, and reassurance. So he builds. He writes. He thanks. And in doing so, he leaves behind something even more valuable than gold. Stability. You sit under the shade of a wide-leafed baobab tree, watching a group of architects sketch lines into the dust. They're arguing, not angrily, just the kind of low, measured bickering that happens when everyone thinks their version of a dome is most mathematically perfect. They're planning a new mosque, this one in Timbuktu. And yes, it'll involve mud. A lot of mud. Glorious, sun-baked, strategically molded mud. You're witnessing what might be Mansa Musa's most enduring obsession, urban planning. The man loves cities. Not just as places for people to sleep and haggle and occasionally complain about goat prices, but as living, breathing symbols of civilization. And Timbuktu? Oh, she's the jewel in his desert crown. You walk her winding alleys, where students sit cross-legged with books open on their knees. Camels plod past with baskets full of paper and ink. Ink, you note, is more precious than spice here. The salt caravans may build economies, but it's knowledge that Musa believes will hold them together. Scholars still argue whether Musa himself was deeply learned, or merely admired learning enough to fund the people who were. Either way, you won't find him sneaking off for a wild poetry night. He's more likely to be commissioning translations of astronomy texts from Arabic into Sonic. At the Sankor Mosque, which he heavily funds and expands, you glimpse a kind of academic utopia in progress. It's not just a place to pray, it's a university, a meeting point, a hub. Think less Oxford with sand, and more Google campus, but everyone's in robes and no one's rushing. And the curriculum? Wildly eclectic. You've got theology next to botany, grammar next to geometry. One very enthusiastic scholar invites you to sit in on a debate about whether sleep is a form of temporary death. Spoiler, no consensus is reached. But while Timbuktu thrives, other regions need coaxing. You accompany Musa to Gao, a city with a bit more grit and a lot more skepticism. The local elites aren't quite sure they want to be folded into the calm, gilded pages of Musa's empire. They like their independence. Their slightly rowdy festivals. Their fish stew without royal approval. So what does Musa do? He listens. He doesn't impose a single blueprint on every city. Instead, he adjusts. Maybe less gold plating here, more trade incentives there. It's a quiet lesson in leadership. One size doesn't fit all, especially when the empire in question stretches over 1,000 miles of deeply diverse terrain. And yet, no matter where you go, you see Musa's fingerprints. A new well funded here, a school commissioned there, a woman's market permitted to flourish just outside a mosque courtyard. He's not above pageantry, though. Once a year, he stages a processional through Niani, his capital, with enough subtle sparkle to make even the most seasoned diplomat raise an eyebrow. There's music, dancers, and the slow clomp of armored horses that have absolutely no battlefield purpose anymore, but do look incredibly majestic. Musa himself wears white robes, gold-threaded at the hem, his staff carved with verses. At one of these processions, you overhear a young boy ask his mother, "Is he the king of the world?" She chuckles, but doesn't answer right away. It's a fair question. You travel next to Walata, a desert town near the edge of Musa's reach. It's quieter, more austere, but even here, the ripple has arrived, a new library, its shelves half full and growing. A caravan has just brought a stack of books from Egypt, wrapped in waxcloth and prayers. The librarian, who's 12 and extremely confident, tells you that he plans to out-archive Timbuktu. Good luck, kid. Now, the empire isn't all shimmering sand and scholarly scrolls. There are disputes. Land disagreements. Arguments over grain prices. Even a mild rebellion in a northern province where a governor got a little too ambitious with tax hikes and sheep collection. Musa sends envoys, not armies. Well, not first, anyway. His approach is always layered, diplomacy first, flattery second, a well-timed gift third, and only if all else fails, a very firm reminder that Mali's armies are not imaginary. They're just resting. Like well-fed lions. Historians still debate whether Musa's non-military style of governance weakened his grip on far provinces or made him beloved enough to keep things relatively stable. But while the empire's borders shift, its core holds. And the core hums with innovation. You watch as artisans craft intricate jewelry from gold, yes, but also from locally sourced amber, bone, and seashells. Blacksmiths create tools so balanced they feel like extensions of your arm. The economy thrives not just because of wealth, but because of craft. One afternoon, you attend a storytelling competition. Yes, that's a thing. Griots from various regions gather to outdo one another in tales of lineage, love, and questionable animal decisions. One recites a saga involving a heroic crocodile who may or may not have become a scribe. Musa funds the winner with a year's supply of rice and a seat at court. Culture isn't an afterthought in his empire. It's the soul of it. And now you see what Mansa Musa is really building. Not just cities. Not just mosques or libraries. But identity. A sense of we, diverse, yes, and occasionally disorganized, but connected by shared memory and mutual investment. By the time the sun sets behind another rising dome, you realize something. You haven't seen a coin in days. Commerce is happening all around you, in trust, in knowledge, in collaboration. The empire is quietly modern, in ways you didn't expect. And somewhere nearby, Musa is probably nodding at a map, asking someone to redraw a border, just a little wider. You wake to the sound of bells, tiny ones, fastened to the ankles of dancers who move like reeds in a soft breeze. Somewhere nearby, a celebration is happening. You shuffle into the sun and find yourself in the middle of a wedding procession. Gold is being thrown, not actual coins, but petals laced with fine golden powder. They catch the light, float like stardust, and land on the happy couple's shoulders. Mansa Musa, ever the public enthusiast for well-choreographed joy, is watching from a shaded pavilion. He loves a good ceremony. In fact, he believes deeply in the value of pageantry. Not in the shallow show-off sense, though he can show off with the best of them, but as a glue. Something that binds a people. Rituals, songs, synchronized dancing, these are how a culture remembers itself. You sit beside an elderly woman who's watching the dancers with tears in her eyes. She tells you that in her village, everyone knows the beat of this rhythm before they can walk. It's the same beat her grandmother hummed during rain prayers. The continuity stretches longer than any single king's reign. Musa understands this. He doesn't try to erase customs. He amplifies them, funds them, gives them space in the city square alongside Islamic scholars and stonemasons. His court is multicultural and multilingual, his couriers often switching between Mandinka, Arabic, and Songhai mid-sentence. That same day, you're summoned, well, politely invited, to watch Musa meet with a delegation from the Mossi kingdom. These are not exactly close allies. There's tension here. Old raids, old grudges. But Musa greets them like old drinking buddies at a reunion buffet. They exchange gifts. The Mossi offer carved stools and a strangely beautiful gourd shaped like a turtle. Musa responds with bolts of patterned fabric, rare spices, and a horse that somehow manages to look smug. And then, they talk poetry. You blink. This was supposed to be a diplomatic negotiation, right? But no, they're trading verses, riffing off one another's metaphors, and debating whether rivers or mountains make better metaphors for courage. The whole thing ends with laughter and a plan for trade in the spring. That's the Musa method. Historians still argue whether he was a skilled manipulator or just pathologically likable. Maybe both. What's clear is that he rarely used force when a well-timed poem, or a gift of salt slabs, would do. And the gifts, oh the gifts. Musa treats generosity as strategy. His go-to move. Overwhelm with kindness. You want to insult him? Good luck, he'll just compliment your horses, admire your embroidery, and offer you 12 silk robes and a seat at dinner. One tale you hear again and again involves a visiting merchant who openly criticized Musa's court for lacking real sophistication. By nightfall, the man had been invited to 4 feasts, gifted 2 camels, and recruited to teach rhetoric at a local school. He stayed 6 years. But not all visitors are so easily charmed. Traders from Genoa arrive with stiff collars and stiffer attitudes. They've heard of this rich African king and want proof. They're expecting chaos. What they find is order, elegance, and bookkeeping more meticulous than their own. Still, they're skeptical. So Musa gives them a tour. Not just of gold, though yes, there is so much gold, but of governance. He introduces them to ministers fluent in trade routes and taxation. Shows them wells dug for migrating communities. Points out that the empire's roads are being widened for donkey carts. The Genoese scribble notes furiously. They were ready to laugh. Instead, they end up negotiating textile imports. You walk with Musa that evening, through a mango grove just outside Niani. He's quiet for a while. Then, he asks you a question: how does a man become remembered? You consider. Gold might sparkle, but it doesn't speak. Books might endure, but only if someone chooses to read them. People, then, people who tell stories. People who whisper names into futures not yet born. He nods. Then chuckles. So I must keep the storytellers well fed. Later, you sit with those same griots again. One is composing a new ballad, The Tale of the Golden Pilgrim. It's about Musa, of course. It's flattering, but also a little cheeky. There's a line about his sandals being so shiny, birds try to land on them. Musa approves. Humor, he says, is proof of comfort. If your people can tease you, they trust you. That night, you lie under the stars, full of stew and sweet mint tea, listening to the griots sing. One verse echoes again and again: he gave more than gold, he gave us names for ourselves. And in that moment, under that sky, you understand something deeper. Mansa Musa's real empire is not land. It's story. And story, once rooted in memory, rarely dies. You wake to the scent of paper. Not fresh, printer paper sharpness, but old parchment, a dusty, slightly sour aroma tinged with ink and centuries. You're inside a library. Not just any library, though. This is Timbuktu's famed Sankore University, and Mansa Musa has insisted you see it for yourself. He's not here right now, of course, too busy funding things, but his fingerprints are everywhere. Quite literally in some ledgers, where his elegant script lingers beside the budgets he helped allocate for the library's expansion. You run your fingers across shelves stacked with manuscripts. Not all are in Arabic. Some are in Ajami, African languages written in Arabic script, while others mix mathematical diagrams with decorative calligraphy that's clearly been doodled during long lectures. Some things never change. Sankore isn't a university in the modern lecture hall sense. It's more like a knowledge bazaar. Scholars gather in shaded courtyards, students sit in circles around mentors, and goats occasionally wander through philosophical debates. You settle in beside a cluster of wide-eyed teenagers learning about astronomy. The teacher uses a gourd and 3 pebbles to explain planetary alignment. It's charmingly low-tech. Musa had this place revamped after his famous pilgrimage. He brought back scholars, architects, and armfuls of books from Cairo and Mecca. Some stories even say he tried to convince a few Islamic jurists to move to Mali with promises of mangoes and sunshine. Historians still debate whether this recruitment spree was more about genuine intellectual passion or a strategic play for religious credibility. Either way, it worked. Under Musa's rule, Timbuktu became the Oxford meets Baghdad of West Africa. Its libraries were famous, its scholars quoted as far away as Persia. Even today, manuscripts from this era are being recovered, some hidden in clay pots, others wrapped in goatskin under floorboards. You overhear a conversation between 2 librarians debating whether a particular poem is Sufi mysticism or just a really intense breakup letter. One of them has tea stains on their robe. The other has a quill tucked behind one ear and mango pulp on their sleeve. It's hard not to love this place. Outside the library, the market buzzes. Not with shouting, but with soft haggling, the kind that sounds more like poetry than commerce. A bookbinder tries to trade a story in exchange for 2 lengths of indigo-dyed cloth. You're not sure who wins, but both walk away smiling. And there, near the shade of a large fig tree, is an open-air court. Not the legal kind, though Musa did support Islamic courts, but one for debate. Today's topic: which is more vital to the soul, music or bread? Spoiler: the musician wins, but only after passing around a lute for everyone to pluck. You stop by the scribe's quarter, where children are learning to mix ink from soot and tree sap. One girl dips her finger in a pot and casually signs her name on your forearm. "To remember," she says. Later, you return to Musa's compound, which isn't as palace-y as you'd expect. Yes, there's elegance, but it's earthy. Sun-dried bricks, intricate geometric woodwork, and rugs that smell faintly of cinnamon. Musa is seated under a canopy, listening to a scholar recite verses from a newly arrived text. He waves you over. "Do you know," he begins, "that some believe libraries are like gardens?" You blink. "Books as plants." He nods. "Ideas as seeds. The more you water them, the more they grow." Then he leans in and whispers, "Though I still prefer mangoes. At least they taste like something." That night, you dream in script. Not letters, exactly, but spirals and dots, lines that wind like rivers. In your dream, you walk through a forest of knowledge, and each tree is a volume, each leaf a verse. By morning, your pillow smells faintly of old paper. Or maybe your imagination is just overly suggestible at this point. Either way, Mansa Musa has made one thing clear. For all the talk of gold, it is ink, quiet, stubborn, and slow, that leaves the longest mark. And you suspect that, long after his wealth has passed through 10,000 fingers, it will be these ideas, these libraries, these arguments about music versus bread, that continue to whisper his name. Morning arrives, and the city breathes in slow harmony with the river. You stretch under the same canopy where Mansa Musa had sat the evening before, and somewhere nearby, a rooster gives a half-hearted crow as if even he respects the mellow pacing of Timbuktu's scholarly life. But today, you're going with Musa, not just observing from the sidelines. You're part of his mobile entourage, his version of a royal field trip. There's talk of an inspection, a site where a new mosque might rise. But no one is rushing. This is Mali, after all, where even bureaucracy wears sandals. Mansa Musa appears, dressed not in dripping gold this time, but in a soft, earth-toned robe with intricate stitching that gleams subtly in the morning light. He nods, waves for you to follow, and mounts a camel with the ease of someone who's probably done this before his first baby tooth fell out. The camel groans, just a little, and then the caravan begins. As you sway along dusty paths, the countryside unfolds, wide plains shimmering with heat, baobab trees shaped like they're caught mid-thought, and children racing the caravan for no reason except joy. A man waves from his peanut farm. A woman carries a clay jar on her head and doesn't spill a drop, even while singing. Along the way, Musa explains the plan. He wants to dot the empire with mosques. Yes, for worship, but also for education, for community, for that specific joy of shade on a hot afternoon. Historians still argue whether these buildings were primarily about spreading Islam, consolidating political power, or just Musa being unable to resist a good construction project. Perhaps it's all three. Eventually, you arrive at the site. It's just dirt and wind right now, but Musa's vision fills in the blanks. "Minaret here," he murmurs. "Library wing there. Courtyard for mango trees." You don't even question the mangoes anymore. A team of architects are already sketching plans in the sand. One uses his sandal to draw rough outlines. Another places pebbles for corners. It's not exactly AutoCAD, but it gets the job done. Nearby, an old man tells a story to some children sitting in a crooked circle. You linger just long enough to hear the words, "hyena in a turban," before a strong gust of wind steals the rest of the tale. After a while, a lunch of dried fish, millet cakes, and sour tamarind sauce is served on woven mats. Musa insists you eat double portions, something about needing the strength to dream big. You oblige, though the tamarind nearly turns your face inside out. The conversation turns philosophical as the plates empty. One advisor posits that a king's greatest legacy isn't gold or battle but the stories told in his absence. Another jokes that Musa's legacy will probably be the guy who paid for all the bricks. Musa laughs. Then, more softly, he says, "Let them remember me however they wish. As long as they remember." The return trip is slower. Bellies full, conversation lazy. You pass a village where local kids have constructed a miniature mosque from termite mound clay. It even has a tiny goat tethered out front, apparently the imam's pet. By the time you re-enter Timbuktu, the sun is beginning its golden descent. Musa rides ahead, silhouetted by the light, looking, just for a moment, like a dusty mirage of a king from a half-remembered dream. Back at the compound, musicians are tuning their instruments. Strings hum like sleepy bees. Drums pulse low, like a heartbeat underwater. You sit, cup of sweet tea in hand, as Musa listens to the musicians rehearse. One of them sings an ode to the river. Another improvises a song about a camel who wanted to be a horse. Musa chuckles so hard he snorts. Before bed, he tells you one more story. It's about the first time he ever saw snow. It had been described in books, he says, soft, white, cold, but he'd imagined it as floating sugar. When he finally touched it, near the Atlas Mountains, he was disappointed. Tasted nothing like sugar, he mutters. You laugh. He winks. Then, with a stretch and a sigh, he retires for the night. And you? You lie back beneath a ceiling painted with stars, wondering how a man this powerful can be so genuinely nice. Perhaps that's the real miracle. Rich and remarkably polite. Dawn again, though by now, even the sun seems to know the tempo. No brash entrance, no dramatic hues. Just a slow, polite rising over the horizon, like it, too, doesn't want to disturb Mansa Musa's morning routine. Today begins differently. You're not following the king through dusty roads or ceremonial visits. You're staying put, nestled in the thick of Timbuktu, because Musa has summoned a delegation of foreign scholars, merchants, and mystics. Some have traveled from as far as Cairo and even Constantinople, their robes still clinging with traces of desert sand or Mediterranean salt. And yes, that one guy from Genoa is definitely wearing too much cologne. Musa greets each guest with the practiced charm of someone who can genuinely make you feel like you matter, whether you're a Persian astronomer or a Tuareg salt trader who rode in on a donkey that limps to the left. Tea flows. Mats are unfurled beneath awnings, and conversation begins, not the shouting kind, but the rolling, gentle debates that feel like a nap for the mind. They're discussing celestial maps, the ethics of taxation, whether camels can recognize faces, apparently they can, and which wood is best for carving a Quran stand. Somewhere in the shade, a wizened elder softly plays a stringed instrument shaped like a sideways canoe. It's not the background music you expect at an academic summit, but somehow it fits. Musa listens more than he speaks, occasionally nodding, asking questions like, if the stars guide us to Mecca, do they also guide Mecca to us? Heads tilt. Beards are stroked. Someone says, so deeply it could echo through a canyon. But it's not all loftiness. Mid-morning, a scholar tells a parable about a frog who opened a university and the salamander who flunked out for being too moist. The entire group chuckles, even Musa, who wipes a tear from the corner of his eye and offers the scholar an extra slice of honeyed date loaf. Diplomatic currency, that loaf. This gathering isn't just idle banter. Musa's real goal? To create a kind of proto-think tank, centuries before the word even exists. He wants Timbuktu to be a lighthouse of knowledge, not just for Mali, but for any traveler with questions bigger than their own borders. Historians still argue whether this was purely strategic, an attempt to impress visiting envoys and solidify diplomatic alliances, or a genuine obsession with wisdom for wisdom's sake. Maybe both. Maybe Musa just liked the sound of people thinking out loud. The scribes work diligently in the background. They're not just taking notes, they're copying pages of foreign manuscripts, translating works into Arabic, even doodling tiny birds in the margins when they think no one's looking. You wander through the modest archives that evening, escorted by a librarian who walks so quietly she might as well float. She shows you pages inked with ancient medicine recipes, migration maps of birds, and poetic odes to things like goats with symmetrical horns. You marvel that Musa funds all of this, just because he can. Just because he believes memory is a kind of wealth. In the courtyard, a heated but respectful debate emerges between two men over whether cinnamon belongs in meat stew. You're not sure how it started, but Musa suddenly appears, suggests adding apricots to balance it out, and walks away like he just dropped the culinary mic. By dusk, the summit winds down. The guests prepare to return to their respective homes. Musa gifts each one a hand-painted map of Mali, a pouch of salt, and, of course, a thick sandwich of spiced egg and pickled vegetables. Because diplomacy is hungry work. You linger on a balcony, sipping mint tea while watching the visitors disappear into the horizon one by one. The stars begin to blink awake. And as Musa joins you, wrapped in a cloak that smells faintly of cedar and desert wind, he says quietly, "Let them remember Timbuktu as the place where ideas were welcomed, and no one left with an empty stomach." You smile. It's hard to argue with that kind of hospitality. You wake to the soft rustle of linen against stone, someone polishing a hallway full of wooden benches with the patience of a monk alphabetizing sand. Musa is already awake, of course. He's always awake. You wonder if he ever sleeps at all, or if he simply reclines with his eyes closed, calculating rainfall patterns and trade routes in his head like a polite spreadsheet with a beard. Today, the agenda has shifted. The royal court is abuzz with discussions about expansion, not of territory, but of culture. Musa is preparing to send emissaries eastward, toward the sultanates of the Swahili coast and beyond. His dream isn't just to build Mali outward, it's to thread it into the fabric of distant worlds through trade, art, and what he calls respectful curiosity. You join him in a courtyard where officials are laying out bolts of woven fabric. Indigo-dyed cloths shimmer like river water in moonlight. Some feature geometric patterns. Others bear elaborate knotwork resembling the twisting paths of caravans across desert sands. These textiles will be gifts, cultural emissaries in and of themselves. Historians still argue whether this move was about economic strategy or a subtle cultural flex. Was Musa genuinely interested in cross-cultural learning, or was he simply draping Mali in a dazzling tapestry of foreign praise? Musa, sipping hibiscus tea, says to no one in particular, "A gift should be like a proverb, beautiful, confusing, and memorable." You write that one down, just in case he forgets and wants to use it again later. At the docks of the Niger River, you watch as sleek canoes are loaded with ivory figurines, books from Timbuktu's scriptoria, and sealed scrolls of royal poetry. Each emissary is handed a formal letter written in impossibly elegant Arabic calligraphy. Musa personally inspects each envelope before it leaves his hand. One emissary, a wiry man named Jaffer who claims to have once debated a parrot about theology, bows deeply before Musa. In return, Musa gives him a carefully wrapped loaf of date bread and a pouch of cloves. "For the journey," he says, "and the stories you'll bring back." As the canoes push off, the river swallows their ripples without a splash, like it too understands the need for quiet dignity. Later, you stroll through the marketplace, less formal, more fragrant. Someone's grilling goat skewers beside a stall selling camel hairbrushes and ceramic whistles shaped like birds. Here, Musa is less a king and more a neighbor. He asks about the seller's cousin, jokes with the potter about her crooked bowls, and offers a silver coin to a child who recites a joke that includes the phrase, "royal toenails." You're told that once a month, Musa wanders the markets incognito, though honestly, there's not much mystery when the tallest, best-dressed man in town starts asking about the price of cinnamon bark. Still, no one makes a fuss. Respect is quiet here, like the way sand shifts when you walk gently. As evening falls, musicians gather in the plaza. They play the ngoni and the balafon, the sound carrying across stone and breeze. Musa stands to one side, hands folded, eyes half-lidded. You get the feeling he's composing something in his head again, perhaps a new charter, or just a way to describe the smell of fried onions on the night wind. One performer, a griot with a voice like warm gravel, begins to sing a praise song for the king. He includes all the usual titles, Lion of the Sahel, Guardian of the Gold, Feeder of the Poor, but also slips in Friend of Figs, and Who Listens with Both Ears. Musa raises one eyebrow but smiles. You ask someone nearby if the song is ancient. They laugh. He makes them up on the spot. Next week, Musa will be the Sultan of Sleepy Donkeys. This evening, in the palace's quietest wing, Musa meets with a calligrapher to approve a new inscription for the city gates. They test several options: knowledge before riches, welcome to Timbuktu, wipe your feet, and a poetic one that translates roughly to, enter lightly, for dreams walk here. Eventually, they settle on a phrase from one of the scholars who recently visited, a city built on questions. Musa nods solemnly. It's the truest map we have. You curl up later under an embroidered blanket, listening to the last ngoni notes fade out in the distance. Somewhere, a cat walks across a clay roof with the sure-footedness of an emperor. You wonder what kind of questions tomorrow will bring. And somehow, despite the buzz of trade plans and emissaries and inscriptions, sleep finds you easily, tucked inside a kingdom where even rest feels politely scheduled. Morning seeps through the lattice windows in gentle gold ribbons, accompanied by the aroma of millet porridge and the less poetic smell of donkey carts unloading something vaguely fish-like. You blink yourself awake and realize Mansa Musa is already seated beside a low table, cross-legged, flipping through an old Arabic manuscript like it's his morning crossword. The margins are filled with little drawings, some scholarly, some suspiciously resembling camels wearing hats. Today, you're accompanying Musa to visit the famed Sankore University, one of his proudest legacies. It sits quietly at the heart of Timbuktu, blending into the sun-baked architecture like a lion hiding among rugs. But inside, it thrums with something electric: quiet conversations, the soft scratch of quills, and students balancing stacks of parchment like precarious towers of toast. You trail Musa through the courtyards where debates swirl like dust devils, students arguing over astronomy, law, or the number of angels that can balance on the tip of a stylus. One teacher is deep into a lecture about the medicinal properties of desert plants. Another is explaining geometry by drawing triangles with a stick in the sand. You hear the phrase, "Historians still argue whether it was the Berbers or the Songhai who introduced these sand-based equations," and make a mental note to pretend you understand what a sand-based equation even is. Musa glides through all this like a librarian who also happens to rule a continent. He pauses to ask one scholar about his paper on wind patterns in Saharan trade. The man excitedly unrolls a scroll that turns out to be mostly arrows and the word "probably" repeated in different fonts. Musa nods, deadpan, and murmurs, "Ah, the universal theory of shrugging." The student beams like he's just passed a royal exam. There's a rumor that Sankore houses over 400,000 manuscripts, everything from treatises on theology to treatises on which kinds of wood make the best book covers. You're led into one such library, and sure enough, the air smells like dust, ink, and ambition. A scribe is painstakingly copying a medical manual written in both Arabic and Songhai, pausing occasionally to chew what looks suspiciously like licorice root. You spot Musa examining a folio titled, "On the Ethics of Camel Ownership." He reads a few lines, then raises an eyebrow. This author, he says, believes camels can sense insincerity. You murmur that it explains a lot about camel behavior. He grins. At lunch, the scholars gather for a meal served under the shade of tamarind trees. There's rice with groundnut sauce, sour tamarind drinks, and a dish involving pickled limes you're pretty sure is just a scholarly dare. Musa insists on sitting among them, not above them. When one student tries to bow too deeply, Musa gently swats him with a tamarind pod and says, "Just chew and argue, that's all I ask." Conversation drifts from ancient Greek texts to astrology to whether or not it's ethical to enchant bread. It is, provided the bread agrees. You marvel at how seamlessly this intellectual garden grows in the middle of what many maps still call nowhere. And you realize that this, more than his caravans or even his gold, is what Musa wants his real legacy to be. In the afternoon, Musa calls a quiet meeting in a tower room that overlooks the river. A breeze rustles the parchments on the table. He speaks softly about the need for scholars to travel, to Egypt, to Persia, maybe even to China. Not just to learn, but to teach. "Let them know we're more than merchants," he says. "Let them see what we dream of." A visiting philosopher, who looks like he hasn't slept since the last lunar eclipse, leans forward and proposes a cultural exchange: books for bamboo paper, poetry for astronomy charts. Musa claps once, delighted. "Perfect," he says. "We'll trade stargazers for ink-stained daydreamers." You later visit the art studios affiliated with the university. Artists are painting illuminated letters, carving ivory bookmarks, and illustrating entire books with scenes of everyday life: women pounding millet, traders haggling with exaggerated expressions, and one particularly excellent drawing of a goat in a hammock. One artist, noticing your interest, offers to draw your portrait. "Hold this gourd," he says, handing you something that sloshes ominously. "It'll give you gravitas." Musa, watching from behind, chuckles. Or indigestion. As the sun begins to set, casting an amber glow over the rooftops of Timbuktu, the university begins to quiet. Students light oil lamps. Pages turn more slowly. The arguments soften to murmurs and then to sleepy silence. You and Musa walk back through the narrow alleys, your sandals brushing against soft sand, your thoughts heavy with philosophy and lime pickles. Back at the palace, Musa stops by the royal scriptorium where scribes work by lantern light. He thanks each one personally, asks about their families, and listens patiently as one explains her theory that every book has a weather, some stormy, some breezy, and one manuscript that's apparently perpetually foggy. Before turning in, Musa unrolls a fresh scroll and begins to write a short poem. You read over his shoulder. The moon speaks in footnotes. The wind leaves edits in the sand. And we, all curious drafts, wait to be rewritten. You don't ask what it means. It's Musa. Meaning is often optional. Later, as you lie on your woven mat, you hear the call to prayer echo across the rooftops. It's joined by the soft rustle of books being closed and dreams being opened. You smile. Timbuktu is not quiet tonight, but it is content. Your morning begins not with sunlight, but with the soft clanging of copper bowls being stacked outside. A sleepy rooster tries to assert dominance, only to be shushed by a passing librarian. You stretch, rub your eyes, and realize that today, Mansa Musa is heading out again, this time to meet with merchants, poets, and perhaps a mysterious mapmaker who claims he once charted the shape of the ocean using only the patterns on a fish's back. The royal caravan is smaller today, but no less stately. Musa, dressed in embroidered indigo robes with thread so fine it shimmers when he moves, walks without guards. His staff, a polished wood piece etched with verses, is the only marker of his title. Beside him, a local merchant unfurls bolts of patterned fabric while explaining the fluctuating price of salt versus saffron. You try to keep up, both with the economics and the walking pace. At the market square, the scene is a theater of textures and voices, traders calling out deals, goats objecting to said deals, incense curling from clay burners, and children darting between baskets like fish in a reef. Musa stops at each stall, not to haggle, but to chat. "Is this honey really from Bobo Dioulasso?" he asks one vendor, raising an eyebrow. "Then where's the sting of its gossip?" The merchant laughs, and throws in an extra jar just for the joke. Historians still argue whether Musa was as generous in daily life as he was on his famous pilgrimage. But here, among baskets of kola nuts and carved spoons, he slips coins to old women and picks out trinkets for palace children. One boy tugs at your sleeve and whispers that Musa once paid a farmer triple for a particularly plump yam. "A yam that noble deserves a better ending," he supposedly said. You're ushered next into a quieter alley where the mapmaker waits. He's draped in tattered robes decorated with stitched stars, and he carries a scroll under one arm and what appears to be a compass made from melon rinds. He greets Musa with a deep nod, then slowly unfurls the scroll, a sprawling map unlike any you've seen. It includes Timbuktu, sure, but also sprawling swirls where oceans should be, cities marked with symbols, a chicken means friendly, a snake means avoid Tuesdays, and curious annotations like possible singing trees and sand too deep to argue with. Musa studies it closely, tracing the river paths and desert trails with his finger. "This," he says softly, "is a dream of the world." You notice that the map also includes a region labeled, "Here there be scholars." Musa chuckles, clearly delighted. "More accurate than lions, most days," he murmurs. The mapmaker explains that he's working on a second edition. "It'll include the moon's shadow," he says mysteriously. "If I can catch it." Musa doesn't question him. Instead, he commissions several copies and invites the man to dine with his scribes that evening. "I suspect they'll argue with your compass," he adds. Lunch is a picnic in the palm grove outside the market. The food is a mix of leftovers from trade, flatbread, dates, smoked fish, some experimental jam that might be made of cactus. Musa seems pleased. "A true Timbuktu feast," he says, "where every bite is imported confusion." You watch as a small group of poets join him, reciting verses that drift through the leaves like drowsy birds. One poem compares Musa to a baobab tree, ancient, sturdy, and full of wisdom. Another is more playful, comparing him to a cat who can cross a chessboard without being captured. A young poet dares to perform something new, a ballad written in both Arabic and Fulani, set to a rhythm tapped on a wooden bowl. Musa listens intently, then nods once, deeply. "Keep writing," he says, "even if the ink runs scared." Later, you trail Musa through a nearby workshop where artisans craft everything from jewelry to instruments. One man demonstrates a stringed lute with silver frets, another woman showcases hand-dyed paper made from flower pulp. You even see a set of ivory dice engraved with tiny proverbs. Each roll offers unsolicited advice, like, "Don't trust anyone who frowns at bread." Musa pauses at a display of carved wooden stools. He points to one with lion-shaped legs and murmurs, "Too aggressive for sitting." He selects a plain one instead, etched only with a small sun. "This is enough," he says. "We sit to listen, not to roar." By late afternoon, the caravan returns through quieter streets. Children wave from rooftops, women nod from courtyards. Musa stops once more at the mosque, not to pray this time, but to speak with the architects about a new addition, a room for musical study. Drums carry truths too, he says. Back at the palace, as the lamps are lit and the sand turns cool underfoot, Musa walks the gardens. You follow in silence, listening to the whisper of the leaves. He stops by a fountain, its water burbling like it's sharing secrets. We trade gold and salt, he says softly, but what stays behind is song. You realize that for all the noise about his wealth, his mountains of gold, his extravagant caravan, what truly defines him is this: a man who invests in stories, in maps of dreams, in the shy hands of poets and the cracked voice of a lute player. That night, as you drift to sleep on a woven mat near the scriptorium, you dream of a new map, one drawn not in ink, but in sound, in footsteps, and in quiet acts of kindness. You're up early again, but this time the sunrise feels intentional. The sky is a slow-blooming saffron flower, casting long shadows over Timbuktu's minarets and modest rooftops. Mansa Musa stands already dressed, facing east, hands folded behind his back. Today, the air smells of sweet spice and fresh parchment. Today feels ceremonial, but in a quiet way, like the soft echo of a drum tapped far off in the dunes. The streets are hushed as you follow Musa toward a large open plaza outside the Jingareber Mosque. There, a crowd has formed, not boisterous, just expectant. Young students in clean robes sit cross-legged in rows. Behind them, scribes prepare inkpots, and a small stand offers tea and something that smells suspiciously like cinnamon bread. A gentle breeze carries the sound of laughter and the rustle of many papers. It's the first day of a new season of scholarship. This isn't just a religious or royal observance, it's a community-wide recommitment to learning. Here, libraries are temples, and copying manuscripts counts as both labor and prayer. Musa steps onto a raised platform and raises a hand. Not in command, but in welcome. His speech is short. Read widely, he says. Speak kindly. If you forget your lessons, return to them as you would to soup, humbly and with a spoon. One historian claims this tradition began during Musa's reign. Others argue it predates him by generations. The truth, as always, is a scroll with one edge missing. But it's clear that under Musa's rule, this annual moment grew, both in ceremony and scope. Foreign scholars began to arrive just to witness it. Some stayed, unable to resist a city where arguments about astronomy and poetry are considered polite breakfast conversation. After the ceremony, you visit the famed Sankore University with Musa. The structure is unassuming, mud brick walls, low arches, but inside, it's a hive of thought. Students recite aloud as they copy texts, carefully curling their script like calligraphic vines. One man is teaching law with the aid of pebbles and an indifferent cat. Another holds forth on ethics by comparing human behavior to how mangoes fall. A heated debate flares in one corner. The topic: whether the soul weighs more than a teapot. A scholar waves a feather emphatically. But if you spill both, only one can be swept up again. Musa chuckles and interjects, "Then we must find a broom for the soul." The students erupt into laughter, and the featherman bows, conceding the round. Musa's patronage here isn't merely symbolic. He funds manuscripts, ensures scholars are housed and fed, and orders translations of major works into Arabic, Songhai, and beyond. A wise man, he says, is one whose bookshelf contains languages he cannot read. You pass a shelf holding texts on medicine, astronomy, philosophy, even cookbooks, one of which claims to cure sadness using cloves and goat milk. But don't get too romantic. Musa also understands logistics. You watch as he meets with scribes and traders to discuss acquiring papyrus, ink, and even imported dyes. There's mention of a delivery route threatened by bandits. Musa suggests a clever workaround, a decoy caravan filled with smelly onions and one very loud parrot. Bandits hate onions, he says sagely. Historians still debate how deeply involved Musa was in academic policies versus just funding the infrastructure. But sources agree, under his rule, Timbuktu's intellectual footprint stretches far beyond its dusty borders. People start calling it the city where knowledge sleeps lightly. A poetic way of saying no one ever shuts up, but in the best way. Lunch is again informal. Musa insists on eating with students today. You're handed a bowl of couscous and a spoon that's seen better days. Musa, sitting on a worn rug beside a stack of astronomy scrolls, talks with a boy who's trying to calculate the weight of a camel's shadow. Another student presents a poem she wrote using only questions. "What is a king without a listener?" she asks. Musa nods slowly. Half a whisper. You spend the afternoon in the scriptorium. This is no quiet library. It's a dusty storm of copying, muttering, yawning, and ink-stained sleeves. A baby goat wanders in at one point and seems to absorb something deep about mathematics. Musa joins in, picking up a page to admire the penmanship. "Letters," he says, "are like people. Best when they stand upright and don't fight." He sits for a time, helping a novice scribe understand how to space lines. "Let the words breathe," he advises. "Even wisdom gets winded." As dusk approaches, you find yourself once more in the gardens. Musa is talking to an elderly woman who once tutored nobles in grammar. She scolds him, playfully, for using too many metaphors. "You've turned Timbuktu into a poem," she says. "Now we can't tell what's real." Musa bows low. "Then let's pretend this bow is literal," he replies. A musician begins to play a soft melody on a stringed instrument you've never seen. The tune drifts over the palm trees like incense. Musa closes his eyes. "Every king should end his day in song," he whispers. "Even the ones who can't carry a tune." As stars begin to freckle the sky, you think back to that scholar with a feather, the poetry written in questions, the girl with metaphor-laced mangoes. This isn't a city frozen in gold. It's one constantly rewriting itself, in ink and laughter and the occasional goat interruption. And at the center of it all stands Mansa Musa. Not just the richest man in history, but a calm orbit around which learning, generosity, and dry humor gently spin. The sun barely crests the horizon on your final morning in Musa's orbit, and already the city hums, low and slow, like a string being plucked in a cavernous hall. Timbuktu stretches its limbs. In the marketplace, early vendors arrange piles of apricots and dates like edible mosaics. In the distance, a camel sneezes and someone curses it in 3 languages. You pull your robe tighter. The air smells like wet clay and roasted grains, spiced with hints of ink and ambition. Mansa Musa is not in his palace. He's sitting cross-legged in the sand, surrounded by children. He's telling them a story about a talking tortoise that tricked an emperor. The moral is a little fuzzy, possibly something about always checking your sandals for clever reptiles, but the kids love it. One interrupts to ask if tortoises wear crowns. Musa nods gravely. "Only on Tuesdays." He glances at you as if to say, "Yes, this is leadership too." You realize you haven't seen a single guard this whole time. Not one ostentatious show of strength. And yet, every alley and atrium hums with security, the kind that comes not from fear, but from being seen. Later, Musa returns to his desk. Yes, a king with a desk, an oak one, cracked at the edges and perpetually covered in scrolls. Today's task, settling a land dispute between 2 families. The arguments are dramatic. One side brings a diagram involving a suspiciously lopsided tree, but Musa listens patiently. He asks questions. He gently corrects a boy who keeps saying approximately when he means allegedly. Finally, he offers a compromise involving shared access to a mango grove and a rotating chicken duty. Everyone nods. The mangoes, after all, are exceptional. This sort of bureaucratic minutiae might bore another ruler, but Musa treats it like a form of meditation. Justice, he says, is the art of explaining mango math until everyone's full and quiet. You follow him through his final rounds of the day, a check-in at the medical hut, where a man insists he cured hiccups by reciting poems backward, a brief consultation about flood management, and a long chat with a young artist who wants to paint a mural of a lion learning to read. At one point, he invites you to the archives. It's a cool, dark room full of palm leaf manuscripts, some rolled tightly, others stacked loosely like forgotten letters. One scroll, dated to his grandfather's reign, details the phases of the moon with illustrations that look suspiciously like goats in various moods. Musa handles it delicately. "We used to believe the moon had feelings," he says. "Now we say it has gravity. I'm not sure which is more poetic." He lets you linger in the archives. You read an old treatise on city planning that recommends building streets wide enough for 2 camels and 1 insulted neighbor. Another document, written in tiny script, is a list of banned musical instruments. The last entry, whatever that thing was, Uncle Salif built out of gourds. By evening, a messenger arrives from the coast. News from a far-off trade partner. Musa listens, nods, and sends back a gift of dyed fabric and a note that reads, "May your grain stay dry, and your neighbors remain only mildly annoying." Historians still debate the exact length of Musa's reign. Some say he ruled for 25 years, others claim longer. Records blur, fade, or more often, disappear under the weight of time and termites. But what remains is something oddly tactile. A city that blossomed under his watch. A memory of generosity that traveled continents. A footprint you could trace, if not with a map, then with a soft whisper. Musa never declared himself divine. He didn't build golden statues of himself or rename the rivers. He built schools. He paid scholars. He remembered names. When he died, quietly, perhaps after a short illness, he left behind no great monument of stone. Just stories. Scrolls. Gentle footprints. And gold, of course. Ridiculous amounts of gold. But you get the feeling he saw it all as a byproduct. Wealth, he once said, is just a louder whisper. If you must shout to be heard, you're using it wrong. His descendants carried on the empire, though none would replicate his calm command. And Timbuktu would rise and fall, flourish and fade, only to be rediscovered again and again by poets and tourists alike. You linger in the city one last time. The stars above are thick as grains of millet. A storyteller sets up on a carpet, children gathering close. "Let me tell you of the polite king," he begins. "He gave away gold, built libraries, and never once yelled, even when someone knocked over his ink jar. And you, already half asleep, smile. Because you've walked those dusty paths. You've heard the laughter in the scriptorium, seen the parrot caravan, eaten the mangoes negotiated in court. You've lived, however briefly, in the slow, steady orbit of Mansa Musa. Now, as we draw this journey to a close, allow your breathing to slow with the rhythm of those desert footsteps. Picture the sun dipping behind the mud-brick towers of a city that once shimmered with golden light and quiet wisdom. Feel the soft warmth of Timbuktu's evening air, that last little kiss of heat on stone before night folds over the city like a well-worn blanket. Let the sounds fade gently, papers rustling, distant debates over stars and soup, a faintly braying camel in the distance. Even the clink of coins and the whisper of pens finds their rest. Mansa Musa is gone now, but his world lingers. You've seen it in the careful curl of a scholar's script, in the playful tug-of-war between merchants over how many dates equal a chicken, and in the silent promise of a king who led not by fear, but by presence. So let your mind soften now, like ink drying on a page, like the scent of cloves fading into dusk. Let it drift with the caravan dust, out past the city walls, past the dunes that roll endlessly into sleep. Nothing to worry about here. No deadlines. No decisions. Just a golden hush. A library of dreams. And a whisper that says, "You're safe. You've arrived."